Okay, I think we're ready.
Yeah.
What are we going to talk about? What are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah. So why are we doing this, Carl?
Well, we're doing this, I guess, because every time we do a video about the Escort, or now the Jag here, everybody says, what about this car in the background? What about that car in the background? And we can't put the time into doing a full video about all of the builds that we're working on. But what we can do is a quick walk around now. So I thought we've got a moment where most people are not doing anything really noisy, but obviously bear with us because there will be some noise in the background. I'm not going to tell everybody to stop working, but let's have a little look around at everything that we're currently working on, or at least the majority. So starting with one that you may have seen already, this is the Mark II Jag. I called that Project Utah. Now there's a whole video series about that we're in the early stages of, so I'm not going to elaborate totally on that, but it's totally remodeled cosmetically. We're running a Toyota 2JZ for reasons which are explained in the other video series, and it's basically just going to be a really cool looking kind of daily drive modernised Mark II Jag, but with a classic look to it. And then if we have a little scoot along here, what I probably neglected to mention, but it's fairly obvious, is this is the Metalwork Area. So when projects arrive, we strip them down to a bare shell. We do that here, we blast the cars here, and then they spend the rest of their time in metalwork in this area. So we're basically working on 3 cars at the minute. The Mark II Jag, we're working on this Cortina, which actually started as this Cortina. This is a build for a repeat customer of ours, and he basically wanted a real sleeper, so almost a standard looking Mark I Cortina. But we're going to put a Cosworth built Duratec in it, 250 horsepower, dry sumped Duratec. It'll have rack and pinion steering, upgraded brakes, basically all of the driveline upgraded, but look more or less standard on the outside. And again, the interior, these early airflow Cortinas, they call them, just have a gorgeous looking dash, so we're trying to keep all the interior relatively standard. Now, a story that we encounter worryingly often occurred with this, in that he brought us this car and said, can you use this car as the basis for the build? And we got a little way into working on it. The idea, unusually for us, was not to strip it completely. We were going to leave it alone in terms of the paintwork, leave it alone in terms of the interior, and just upgrade the mechanicals. But we got a little way in and then found some worrying areas underneath where structural chassis sections were just wedged full of filler. And then, I mean, these are a weak shell anyway. There's a big gap in the chassis legs. They come kind of part way down the floor and then end and then start again near the back. So they're a very notoriously flexible shell, and we had various conversations back and forth with the owner expressing major concerns about putting this much effort into making a car fast that had questionable structure underneath. And everywhere we dug away at the paint underneath, there was either bad welding, bits that weren't the right shape, or holes full of fillers. So we started thinking this just wasn't the right shell. And we already knew of this car, which was an African import. So structurally, really, really sound. Yes, it needed outer panel work doing. It's been knocked around in a few places. Got a few frilly bits in the typical place you get on these import cars, where rainwater and dust has basically settled in areas. But it's structurally way, way better. So we're basically now building that Cortina instead of this Cortina. This one's donating some of its body parts, like the back panel, which was actually quite good on that car, whereas this one was dented and damaged. So yeah, we're going to create an awesome, stock-looking, nicely executed, 250 horsepower, Cosworth-powered Cortina. It's going to be an awesome car. And opposite end of the Ford spectrum, but actually I think the same year. Stu, this is that. What year is the Cortina? 66. And what year is this? 66, isn't it? 66. Oh yeah. There you go. Opposite end of the Ford spectrum. Mustang, 66, same year as the Cortina, and the original cars were both white as well. This one's just a standard restoration. So we're just going to restore the whole body shell to a painted shell, and then the owner's going to have it back to do the rebuild on it himself, which we're happy to do. Our rule here basically is that we want everything that leaves the door to be all our work. So we're happy to do a shell to a painted shell and then hand it back to the owner to do the rebuild. What we're less keen on is doing jobs where we're putting a load of work into something that still has a lot of somebody else's work on it, where this will all be our work. It's pretty rotten, it's pretty damaged. I went to view it at the owner's house probably a year ago, and basically it was an MOT'd on the road car. but I'd say almost every panel, certainly from the bulkhead back, needs replacing. It's been in a major accident at the back. The chassis legs are bent, all of the rear floor structure's not where it should be. And we're now going to be replacing the scuttle panel, the floor pans, all the way through, literally from the bulkhead to the back panel, inner and outer arch tubs, quarter panels, roof, the rear deck panel, the rear panel, and basically all of the smaller parts that join all those structures are all going to be replaced with new. Now there's a little question mark there in that you can actually buy complete new shells, but when you take into account the shipping of a new shell and the fact that it's highly likely a new shell is going to need a lot of work to get it up to scratch in terms of panel gaps and that sort of thing. On balance, we're still, and obviously the biggie is you still need a car to donate the ID to go onto the new shell. So on balance, it makes sense to restore this shell. So we're just literally, we've blasted it and we're about to mount it up on this jig, which will be jigging all of the major suspension mounting points to make sure they're in the right place, which I'm almost certain they won't be at the back. And then we'll basically jig those points and build a new shell around it. So that's that one. And then once we finish that metalwork, it will go through and begin our body prep process, working towards paint. And there's a car there at the minute which is at that stage. So once we finish the metalwork, the shells get rolled into this booth here, which is our blasting booth. They get re-blasted, and then immediately after that we do our flame sprayed zinc process on the underside of the car, which is basically a gun that literally sprays molten zinc with an oxypropane torch, coats the underside in zinc, which just gives it incredibly good corrosion resistance. And then we seal the whole shell in with epoxy primer at that stage, and then it will go over to Gaz, who will basically start all of the process which leads up to paint. So that would be starting with seam sealer, sealing all of the closed seams on it. There's usually a degree of filler work and block sanding to do, and or lead filling wherever one or the other is more appropriate. Then that car there you see is currently in a polyester coat, which is kind of the final coat we block sand before we seal it all in with an epoxy primer again, which is the last stage before final paint. That car is a Mercedes W111, which is one of a pair of Mercedes that we're building at the moment. Both cars are running Jag XJ subframes, air ride, Chevy LS3 with the matching GM Auto box, and completely bespoke interiors. Basically, the remit for the project on both of them was just a gangster cruiser, you know, something that looked mean, cruised nicely. It was never going to be driven in a real performance fashion, but something that was fast, cruised well, comfortable, and just looked the part, and totally separated from your average one of these, but without looking obviously modified. You know, that's the art, is modifying a car extensively, but it looking like that's how it always was. You know, if you imagine you'd never seen one of these before and you saw our version, I would feel we'd done our job right if the person didn't know it was modified. So yeah, the Jag subframes, reason for that is a lot of people who lower these just literally stick airbags instead of the springs. The axles are weak on them anyway. They're a horrible swing axle that literally bends in the middle, or pivots in the middle, and you get a ridiculous camber change, and basically a car that isn't going to be reliable or nice to use with that much power. So we've used the Jag subframes because A, they're very strong, B, you can get the parts, C, they're much more nicely engineered. I mean, this is 1950s technology on the original suspension versus 1990s technology. And the biggie is that we can mount the subframes higher in the body, so we can actually run it with exactly the correct geometry, but with the shell a lot lower to the road than it would have originally been. But the air ride gives us the ability to raise it up. And that's another reason for the Jag subframes. There's some immense amount of suspension travel, I think 9 inches of suspension travel on them. So you can run them low with the correct geometry, but still have masses of raising up ability for speed bumps or whatever. So that's that. Gaz is literally in the final stages before epoxy, masking it now. It'll go in the booth later, either later today or tomorrow, to be sealed with epoxy primer, and then that's the last stage before we wet sand that, put the final paint on, at which point it'll go through to the assembly shop. So we can have a look through there. Quick stop at the imp there. That's almost done. We're literally in the very final stages of testing. those in the UK might have seen this at the NEC Classic Motor Show, which was 2 weeks ago, I think it was. I was over at SEMA at the time, but we had this transported for the owner over there. It was on the Hillman Imp club stand. I think he had a great time just showing it off. Basically, you know, it's been a few years in the making for him, so I think he had a really enjoyable time showing it off, and I think he's really looking forward to getting it back, because I'm told it's going in his lounge when it's done, so a nice centrepiece to the lounge. Well, I'm hoping he's not just going to sit on it. Aha, Father Christmas. So we sneak through this, passage, an unassuming looking passageway, which goes through to the assembly workshop, as we call it. So this is basically where the painted shells come and spend the rest of the time here being built to a finished car. So we start here. It's a Mark 1 Golf Clipper, which is the late convertible. Basically, they actually carried these on alongside the Mark 2. So this is a very late one, which means the Mark 2 Golf had already come out at this point. But for the convertible, they basically built a body kit for the Mark 1 because they hadn't yet developed the Mark 2 convertible shell. So this shell was absolutely mint. We did a little bit of rust repair on the sills, but it's one of the best shells I've seen. You'll have to forgive the noise. We're building a mezzanine at the moment over there, which I'm not going to stop progress, but as with everything we do, we're doing it all in-house, so all of the work's being done by our own guys. They're just cutting the floorboards for the upstairs, and that's going to be an extension to the trim shop. So we have an in-house upholstery. We have an in-house upholsterer working upstairs, and basically that area is going to be his new extension to his workshop. And his current workshop is going to be handed over to basically be a design studio. So that'll be specifically for the renderings for interior or exterior design that Dean does, and Nat will also be having a CAD station up there. So he's got a quieter area to go and do the engineering side of things. So yeah, Mark 1 Clipper. Amazing shell. We've stripped it bare, done the small amount of metalwork it needed. It's painted Porsche Iris blue, gorgeous shade of blue, and then we're going to be doing a Rotrex supercharged 20 valve VW engine in it, which is more power than anybody could ever want through the front wheels. So it's going to be a fun car. Very much a sort of 90s look to it, which is definitely something that's coming back. You can see we've got the Azevs on there, which are definitely a 90s look that's due a resurgence, and in the midst of a resurgence at the minute, I would say. And then at almost total opposite end of the spectrum, there are a pair of Mercedes Pagodas, and these two are just standard concourse restorations. So we're taking them back to pretty much exactly how they would have been when they left the factory. This one's perhaps slightly more about originality than this one. This one has a non-standard colour on it, but certainly in terms of all the details, it's going back to standard. And these restorations kind of have their own set of challenges. A lot of people say, you know, how do you plan these amazing modified projects? And in a way, it's almost easier, because whenever there's a decision to make about how something is done, we just make up how it's going to be done. We come up with a solution. Whereas with these, it's not just, you can't just make up how something is mounted or make a bracket. It has to be how it was. And so sometimes when stripping the parts down, you know, when it's like for instance, we're doing a fuel pump rebuild for the lift pump in it at the minute, and that is literally pulling the fuel pump completely to its component parts and zinc plating the individual parts of the fuel pump. And that kind of process extends to everything on it. The engine build we've done here, and again, the level of detail when we're trying to get every detail looking perfect, there's a huge amount of work involved, and sometimes it's perhaps thought that an original restoration is a relatively easy one, but they're if anything harder than the custom builds. So 2 factory restorations on 2 cars that are gone up in value massively over the last few years. I mean, these are going to be seriously expensive cars when they're done, which if you went 10 years ago, I think maybe 50,000 might have bought you a pretty good example. Now you're looking at more like 150,000, maybe 200,000. And then the Luncheon Stratos, which is again, couldn't be more removed from these, being a totally radically modified build. It's a new build based on a kit from Lister Bell, but the owner wanted something that was totally different from your average Stratos kit car. They generally tend to be a motorsport inspired thing with maybe a rally livery on them, and they're usually used for track days or rallies. He wanted a road car, and he wanted something that was really apart from any of the normal ones you see on the road. Not that you see many of them. So we've designed a complete one-off interior for it, which is radically different to the original, which has, originally there's like a flat panel in front of the driver with the gauges in. And it's just not, it's more of a functional interior than anything. We've kind of got rid of that. It's just a sweeping dash with a 9-inch screen from Life Racing, which basically floats in front of the driver. There's a keypad moulded into the door, which controls the PDU, which controls all the electronics on the car. And a lot of these things were a nod to the concept car that Bertone did before the actual Stratos came out, which was called the Stratos Zero. And the colour was inspired by that as well. So there's a lot of cosmetic inspiration coming from that car. And then power, we're doing an Alpha 3.2 V6, which we've completely rebuilt. And we're doing an Eaton M112 supercharger on it, which most of that conversion is done. There's just one, we've got to finish the charge cooler, which is what sits on the back here. And then we can finish that boost plumbing there. A lot of people say, why is the supercharger sitting over the front like that rather than in the V? And there's a really good reason for that, which is that one of the most iconic things about this Alpha V6 is the 6 chrome pipes that come out from the inlet manifold to the engine normally. And we wanted to keep that. So we've got the charger over the front, a charge cooler at the back here, and then there will still be a modified version of those 6 chrome pipes, which have actually just gone off for chrome at the moment. So I think once this is finished and the chrome works in place and everything's in place, it's going to be a pretty impressive engine bay in there. And a lot of technology on it as well. The electronics suite, all from Life Racing, and it all ties together, so the dash can display all of the electrical system information, how much current's being drawn on any one electrical channel at any time, all of the engine data. It's got wheel speed sensors, which will give you traction control. It's fly-by-wire, so we've got a fly-by-wire throttle body and a pedal from a BMW, actually, a fly-by-wire throttle pedal. So really cool and sort of adventurous project. This one you might recognise. That's Murray's Escort, which you can probably tell from the mud that's all over it. We've been out road testing in late November. All went really well. We've dropped the diff because we had a problem with some oil being blown out through the diff breather. So we're making a revision to the diff breather to stop that happening. Once that's back together, we'll be on to road testing again, but certainly the initial signs were no major issues. Fingers crossed that carries on, and it was a fun car to drive, that's for sure. It's just when you first go out in these things, you're nervous about every little noise and you sort of start not to focus on the driving experience, but for the brief moments I was out in it and sort of starting to immerse myself in the driving experience, it felt absolutely amazing. So that's good. Last but not least is this, which I don't even know if we've ever seen in any of the videos. But this is a really cool project. It's an unusual car to be having sort of extensive work done on it. It's a Nissan Sunny ZX Coupe. And it's the biggie on this one is the radical body redesign we've done on it. So more or less everything from the swage line down is custom made metalwork. The door's basically standard, but all of the sill structure, the whole quarter panel, both sides obviously, the front wing from the swage line down, and both bumpers and all of the rear panel are all handmade metalwork. So all of the quarter panel is literally handmade in steel as a single piece quarter panel. It's not a hodgepodge of a million different little pieces. Stu literally hand formed this entire quarter panel, and we grafted that in. The bumpers are handmade in aluminium, and it's just an exciting exercise for us, and I think a challenging one for Stu, but one that he really enjoyed, which is more or less the closest we've come, perhaps now topped by Utah, of building a body shell sort of from scratch, which I guess is something that may be on the horizon in the coming years, but yeah, it's an exciting car to be a part of. We've just got to get some custom wheels made for it, which have been a bit of a roller coaster ride of companies saying they can do it and then not doing it. But once we've got those wheels on, and also the glass really completes the look on the back here. Kind of looks a bit like a pickup until you get the glass in there. And then we've done a hand-formed aluminium spoiler that sits on the back here as well, which completes the look. So yeah, that's basically it. And I suppose we started with looking at when a car arrives being stripped down, and this is basically when a car leaves, final stages, road testing, and then handover. So that's us.